Putin's version of peace, Russian occupiers have struck Ukraine again. The response was swift. Almost 250 drones were launched towards Russia. A Ukrainian strike on Taganrog destroyed Russia's unique laser aircraft. Yes, the aircraft in... Defense of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian armed forces prevent the enemy from advancing. A critical shortage. Russia is rapidly losing armored vehicles.
Losses are so critical that the military is using equipment in the special military operation that previously served as props at the Mosfilm movie studio.
Britain intercepted Russian ships off its coast.
The Russian vessels were slowly moving west through the Dover Strait, but London did not leave them unattended for even a minute.
Moscow is under threat. Russians are in a panic. In
the capital's airports, temporary flight restrictions have been imposed. And in Zelensky, employees and students of the National Research University were evacuated.
Foreign troops in Ukraine. Macron has revealed the West's plans. This concerns international security forces.
And now more details about this and more. Hello, you're watching the Ukraine Today YouTube channel. Subscribe to our channel and like this video. It's quick and easy for you, pleasant for us, and YouTube's algorithms like it and help promote our content. Thank you, and let's get straight to our topics. In the near future, Volodymyr Zelensky will meet with his American counterpart, Donald Trump, to discuss a plan to end the Russian war. Will Ukraine be able to turn the situation in its favor? We'll cover this in our next segment, and afterwards we'll discuss all the latest twists and turns surrounding the Russian-American peace plan with an expert.
The peace plan is shifting in Ukraine's favor, and apparently the American side is satisfied with everything. Any future agreement must fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty and ensure a lasting and just peace. This is the main takeaway after the negotiations between the Ukrainian and American delegations on the peace plan in Geneva.
It's too early to announce the results of the negotiations on Ukraine. They are still ongoing. I think today was our most productive day on this issue in a very long time.
According to Western journalists, the working version of the American peace plan for Ukraine already differs from what was previously published in the media. The framework document has been significantly revised.
I think that certain changes have actually been made there, and most likely these are indeed fundamental changes because, well, first of all, on the one hand, the Americans have never denied, and it's true, but at least publicly, that some changes can be made to the plan. Secondly, I think that the arguments presented by our delegation were sufficient to convey a certain minimum sense of justice related to ending the Russian-Ukrainian war.
NSDC Secretary Rustem Umerov stated that the updated version of the American peace plan takes into account most of Ukraine's key demands. Moreover, he states that the document is already in its final stages. Of course, the specific changes have not been officially disclosed. But even the slightest changes are likely to displease Russia. However, as experts say, that is no longer Ukraine's problem.
If they do not agree to a plan that is ultimately coordinated between Ukraine, the United States, and the European Union, then Donald Trump will have to start putting even more pressure on Russia. It's all very simple. The so-called plan that was presented, well, it's not really a plan, it's just a list of Russian wishes. That's not how things are done, and probably everyone in the world understands that. The Russians thought maybe it would fly, excuse the expression, but since it didn't, it looks like they'll have to accept the situation, express some of their wishes, and let them present whatever arguments they have.
The Kremlin is speaking cautiously about negotiations for now. No threats or ultimatums from them. Peskov stated that they are supposedly closely monitoring the situation. But officially, the Russian side was allegedly not informed about any adjustments to the peace plan.
We have not received any information so far. Of course, we are monitoring things closely. The media, which have been loudly proclaiming, including in the media itself, repeatedly. But officially, we have not received anything yet.
At the same time, Peskov added that this week Russia does not plan to hold talks with the U.S. delegation regarding Ukraine. This is yet another piece of evidence that Trump's plans to hold negotiations before Thanksgiving on November 27th are falling through. Earlier, The Economist reported that the deadline for Ukraine to sign the American peace plan had been postponed. November 27th is no longer the final deadline. These issues have now been removed from the agenda. According to journalists, this also includes questions about the possible termination of Ukraine's access to American intelligence and weaponry.
As of today, it is clear that the process is underway. We seem to have some time, and perhaps in the near future, we will see some kind of combined version of this plan and be able to study it in more detail.
But this will not happen until the peace plan is discussed by Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. Reuters reports that the president of Ukraine will already travel to the United States this week to meet with his American counterpart. According to sources, they will discuss the most sensitive issues of the peace plan, such as the territorial question.
Joining our broadcast is the head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, Ihor Chelenko. Ihor, glad to have you with us.
Hello.
Ihor, how dynamically everything is changing, how quickly everything is changing. So if in fact everything can be discussed for a long time and the 27th is not really a deadline and can be postponed, according to the statement by Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, then what was the reason for the initial rush that we observed and the ultimatum-like format in which this American proposal, or Russian-American proposal, was presented?
Well, first of all, we've seen exactly this kind of tactic from the Trump administration more than once, especially when it comes to deadlines. This applied both to the Ukrainian side and to the Russian side. Let's recall, for example, the issue of sanctions and the topic of organizing the meeting in Alaska. There were also specific deadlines there, which, just seem to disappear. And why is that? Because Trump acts according to a very deliberate strategy, where he tries to provoke certain actions precisely through such threats. But as it turned out in the case of Ukraine, we are definitely not the ones standing in the way of achieving peace. That's why, on the contrary, we use this track to strengthen communication and coordination with the United States. We strengthened the issue of cooperation between Europe and the United States. Yes, at first we saw an alternative draft of a peace plan consisting of 24 points, but nevertheless, now we have moved on to an updated version of Trump's plan, where so far everything related to this part of the world has simply been removed from the document due to the lack of confirmation from Europe. But nonetheless, we have seen an acceleration of the diplomatic process. If this pace hadn't been set, I think we wouldn't have seen this meeting in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates today directly with the Russian side, because we demonstrated that we are working on achieving peace, and now the ball is essentially in the Kremlin's court. And when we hear exclamations, for example, from Lavrov himself, who says that the original Trump peace plan was received through unofficial channels and seems acceptable, so it could be considered, but then Europe and a number of European countries who are to blame come into play for prolonging the war. And here a dilemma is immediately voiced. If changes have been made that remove the spirit of Anchorage, then that's it. It completely changes the whole mood. So in fact, the Russian Federation is now trying to show that the more the original text is changed, the less likely it is that the Kremlin will accept it. But the text has already been changed, and moreover, the American side sees that there aren't any such demands in it. That is, there are specific positions there that are objective, that reflect the desire to ensure their own sovereignty and to secure those guarantees that would prevent the Russian Federation from attacking again in the future. And now, obviously, the Kremlin is thinking they'll sign a pro-Russian leaning document, and in 2 or 3 years, there will be a repeat of the same thing, following the pattern of the Second Chechen War. But no one wants anything even close to that. That's why now the Kremlin is essentially entering a state of diplomatic defense, since the focus is now directly on agreeing upon quite reasonable positions that were discussed directly by Ukraine, the United States, and European countries. Well,
yes, diplomatic defense is meant to create the appearance of being open to negotiations, but it's not just diplomatic defense. There's also the terrorist activity that we witnessed just last night. Okay, right now there is a lot of speculation about what was actually agreed upon. Well, officially, yes, it's no longer 28 points, but 19 points, meaning 9 points have been removed from this proposal. I'm not sure how accurate it is to call this document a proposal rather than an agreement. Well, since there isn't an agreement yet, nothing has been signed, so let's just leave it at that for now.
It's more like a framework, just a framework that they're trying to fill in with specific topics, so it's not just a formality. we do see some modernization of the initial proposals that were voiced earlier.
Yes, okay, there's a Financial Times publication stating that Ukraine has agreed to reduce its armed forces. As far as I understand, this specifically refers to the armed forces of Ukraine. This does not concern other units. So if Russia, or rather, if this framework proposal insisted on a 2.5-fold reduction, now it's 800,000. That's not 2.5 times less at all. If these are just speculations, we'll wait for some official information. So, for example, our previous publications, more Bloomberg than Financial Times, speculation as well, according to which the document was actually drafted by Vitkov, Kirill Dmitriev, and Jared Kushner. Who else do we have? Did I mention Jared Kushner? Throw in Trump. And that Trump, up until the very last moment, didn't even know this document existed. Moreover, not only Trump, but also, for example, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also didn't know about it. The reason I'm asking whether this is just a rumor, nothing more, or speculation is this. Because if this is true, then the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, lied about this document. And many other White House representatives as well, either creating some kind of informational noise and information fog or knowingly provided false information.
First of all, let me start with our armed forces. We are receiving mixed signals. On the one hand, there's this article in the Financial Times. Personally, I think this is a bad path. Even if they specify some kind of limit around 800,000, it's still a restriction on our sovereignty. We could specify even 30 million if we wanted to. In other words, this is a matter for the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine and the President of Ukraine, who should be the ones to initiate these things. Earlier signals indicated that the limits had been removed since there is an understanding of the issue of our state's sovereignty. But we'll see really. After all, let me remind you, according to the latest data, the Ukrainian Defense Forces currently have 880,000 personnel, including those who have been mobilized. Personally, in a future agreement, I would be willing to include a reduction in the size of the Ukrainian army, but without specifying any numerical indicators. And the reduction will happen anyway, since there will be a gradual demobilization, a transition to a contract-based system, and many processes where human presence is not required. So this would happen naturally through an evolutionary process. And of course, there's the obvious issue of funding, but I wouldn't set any strict limits in this matter, even though it's understandable from the Russian point of view. This can indeed be described as the implementation of a demilitarization policy. Although I would remind you that before the start of the large-scale invasion, our army was officially listed as just over 210,000, somewhere around 215,000. So, well, that's certainly a kind of demilitarization in quotes, but still. If we're talking about Jared Kushner, about the Vitkov-Dmitriev plan, I absolutely believe in such a thing, and I absolutely believe that it was Dmitriev who leaked this 28-point plan in order to set the right direction in the information space. A narrative would be established showing that Ukraine, against the backdrop of internal political turbulence, supposedly they would be forced up against the wall and made to accept positions that are favorable to Moscow. So obviously, such an information campaign was being prepared, and in principle, we saw it being carried out later on. But thanks to a rather fast pace and comprehensive work in this direction, we were actually able to reverse the flow of these currents. But I am absolutely certain that Trump really doesn't delve into the details of this issue. That is, it's clear he was given a signal that there's such a plan and that the situation in Ukraine is such and such. So why not take this moment to implement it now? There's not much time left until the end of the year, and Trump wanted the war to end by the end of this year, plus he wanted to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, the short list is formed in January of the following year, according to the rules. So in reality, everything lined up perfectly there. But when the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, started to get more actively involved in the issue, or rather started to really work on it, we immediately saw a professional approach. On this issue, every point received maximum attention. maximum attention to the position of the Ukrainian side and accordingly the European side, as well as representatives from the UK. This demonstrated that even within such initial frameworks, we can discuss matters with the United States and defend our position. The only question is how well Marco Rubio will be able to continue coordinating going forward. This direction is important since it is quite obvious that there could be conceptual tension here between Marco Rubio specifically and Driscoll, who was appointed as the special representative for the peace plan and who is a classmate of Vance. Therefore, we should continue to monitor this as well. For now, we do not see any conflict between them, but there is definitely potential for one to arise. This is very similar to how it was along the Kellogg-Witkoff line, specifically regarding how to proceed further in the Russian direction.
Yeah, right. Okay. There is a statement from the Secretary of the National Security Council, Rustem Umerov, according to which a meeting between President Zelensky and his American counterpart, Donald Trump, is planned for an upcoming date, still in November, as I understand it, in the United States of America. At the very least, this already means that by the 27th, that is, by the nearest Thursday in 2 days, this document, the framework proposal, even in its final form, definitely will not be signed. And what do you think Zelensky and Trump should talk about? What issues will they be discussing?
Well, first of all, what has already been unofficially stated, that is what has been put on pause. I think the topics will be NATO and territories. But again, I think the date of the meeting between Zelensky and Trump will actually be determined by today's meeting in Abu Dhabi, where there is still an exchange of views regarding the realism or lack thereof of that document, of the version that resulted from the meeting in Geneva. And again, I want to point out that on the one hand, Mr. Umerov says that by the end of November, the President of the United States. Yesterday evening, our TV channel Suspilne, based on its sources in the United States, noted that supposedly there would be no visit this week. But just as we are recording this video, literally just a few dozen minutes ago, there was a report of the presidential plane moving closer to the Ukrainian border. So it's possible that the president really might fly in almost any day now. Gratitude is needed to move this issue forward, but I think everything depends directly on the results of the meeting, specifically in the United Arab Emirates. It will really show how ready the Russians are to go at least a bit further down the path of compromise. I'm not talking about the final document, because again, there are currently too many signals that the Russians will not accept this document. Nevertheless, I think right now all of this is being analyzed comprehensively in order to truly avoid stalling the peace process. But at the same time, I would of course advise to simultaneously work on the issue of supporting Ukraine next year, based on the assumption that there might not be a peace process, and accordingly this means a reparations loan, further support, so that there is no illusion that the end is just around the corner, and that support will de facto start to fade. This must not be allowed, and it is necessary to show the Russian Federation that Ukraine will continue to receive the necessary assistance for several more years to come.
Okay, Moscow does not agree to this framework proposal. Let's suppose, yes, we're theorizing now. It's unlikely to surprise anyone, but still. Does this mean that there won't be a meeting between Zelensky and Trump, since they would have nothing to discuss going forward? And how could events develop in this case? What should this mean, let's say, for Washington?
I can assume that in principle a meeting could take place. For what purpose? Indeed, in order to sign not a peace plan, but rather a memorandum of intent. We signed something similar before related to the mineral agreement. And I would like to remind you that this memorandum of intent was extremely vague and in principle allowed for the possibility to further develop the document in various directions. And in fact, the result was quite good. So here, I actually also expect that even if there is no confirmation from Russia, some kind of memorandum could very well be signed as well. Some kind of declaration, and the essence will be that Ukraine agrees in principle to continue working on the peace track, specifically according to Trump's plan. This is essentially what Donny will need in order to demonstrate success on the path toward the eventual resolution of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But I think that in reality, we can't do without China on this issue, and that's not by accident. Trump rather quickly made contact with President Xi Jinping. And they really did discuss the topic of ending the Russian-Ukrainian war.
We are following the developments. Igor, thank you very much. Igor Chelenko, head of the Center for Analysis and Strategy, joined our broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.